massive Nightmare on Elm Street fan. Quite simply, during the 1980s, it was the one film that was solely responsible for me getting into horror. In the late 1980s, I was lucky enough, following a trip to Nostalgia and Comics in Birmingham with my dad, to buy the poster for Nightmare 3 and also get the novelisation for Part 1, Freddy's Revenge and Dream Warriors. With the internet not in existence and a 14-year-old boy unable to buy the films he wanted because they were rated 18, although my dad did help me out when I was desperate to get Nightmare 1, this was a massive thing for me, so I went home and read the whole book. I won't go into all the differences, I won't go into the script changes, and I won't go into what I felt should have been in the movies. Instead, I want to talk about the short story at the end of the book, almost an addendum, called The Life and Death of Freddy Krueger. This was the definitive story of Freddy's journey from birth to death and how he became the Elm Street Dream Demon. To make a long story less long, Amanda Krueger, aka Sister Mary Helena, was one of the nuns at the Western Hills Insane Asylum who was locked inside over the weekend with the inmates. After being raped countless of times, she was found and, 9 months later, gave birth to the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Freddy was raised by a succession of reprobates, eventually taken in by a pimp who used him to lure drunks into an alleyway. This man abused him relentlessly, endlessly, horrible abuse, beating, cutting him, and suggested sexually abusing him. Eventually, Freddy turned the pain into pleasure and, relishing in the frequency of cutting himself across his stomach, Freddy ended up getting the nerves to steal the money from the drunk and burnt him alive in his house. Freddy became a nomadic rogue, wandering from town to town with no connection and resembling the remoteness of a schizoid personality disorder with his taciturn, aloof and reclusive nature where he was unable to adapt to regular, everyday life. Whilst drunk himself, he was robbed by 4 teenagers but caught the one with his hand in his pocket and smashed the kid over the head with a bottle. Freddy carried the boy to a secluded place and watched him die. It was here that his masochistic and introverted nature evolved into projected sadism as he watched the boy slowly bleed out. Upon realising that children were useless, Freddy was in control and, ending up in Springwood, decided he would teach these children a lesson. He forged his glove and then, after driving his battered Chevy to a school, lured a child into the back. Holding her down, he cut her stomach and she died. He took the body to a boiler room and commenced his reign of terror therein. You know the rest. Freddy was burned to death by the vengeful parents after the lawyers got fat and the judge got famous. Now, the story told in the movies differs slightly. It's more sanitised. Yes, we see him killing the class hamster and being beaten by Alice Cooper, who clearly represents the pimp mentioned earlier. But in that story, Freddy got married, had a daughter, and killed his wife when she discovered his gloves in the garage. This was much more sterilised and for the masses, but I feel the book told the best version. It's also why I feel Robert Englund played the best Krueger, even when he was pushed into the Mad Hatter, Alice in Wonderland, Grinch hybrid of Nightmare 4, 5 and Final Nightmare, that he just played the perfect caricature. Jackie Earle Haley was great casting in the truly abysmal 2010 remake. He had come off Watchmen and played Freddy as a vengeful villain who was spited from being burned alive and determined to get his revenge. Englund, however, played Freddy as more of a drunk, a perverted uncle, a weirdo and the kind of creepy person you see in a dark alley on the way home. Take the best example of his portrayal, when Nancy's asleep in school and Freddy staggers around the corner as if troubled by severe intoxication and bad gait. He cuts himself while laughing and then chases Nancy, but not with aggression. It's a perverse pleasure in seeing how scared she is. He giggles. He doesn't run. He creeps. He doesn't bully. He leers forward, teasing with his claws and making an oral sex sign with his tongue. "Come to Freddy," he coos, as if talking to a girl much younger than the one he's chasing. Throughout the first film, raking his gloves across steel and rasping in deep tones like a perverted crank caller, Freddy enjoys mutilating himself as much as he makes the girls frightened. He doesn't do this to men. Both Rod and Glenn are killed much quicker, and with Freddy not even in shot. The girls are literally terrorised, cut and forced to watch lewd acts before he finishes them off with a gash to the stomach, before taking them apart with sexual glee. When Tina wakes up in Nightmare 1, she has cuts to her nightgown. It's in the stomach area. When she's killed later on, the first cuts are to her stomach and thorax, just as before. Freddy doesn't mutilate the face, and he doesn't stray to the genitals. Instead, it's the soft, intimate, but not indecent parts of the body he likes to do first. Kudos too for Englund's continuous heavy breathing, rasping, and generally all-round seedy behaviour which unsettles more than the gore ever could. Englund isn't a big man, so he uses unsettling mannerisms when stalking dreams. He is someone, when they were alive, who lured children with charm and then killed them with gross malevolence. So, despite his heinous crimes, he had to use a level of charm and guile to get a child from the school gates into his van. England cackles and laughs throughout, and even when you get to the silliness of Nightmare 5 and Freddy's Dead, where he quite literally apes the wicked witch from The Wizard of Oz, he's a figure of over-accentuation and nightmare manipulation. In the first film, he's shown running with his arms open as if, "I'm coming to get you," when chasing Tina. He also spreads his arm out as if trapping Tina in an inescapable hug of knives. Freddy isn't interested in the boys. He likes the girls, and even before he kills Tina, one last look at self-mutilation is what really gets him off. This is where he cuts his fingers after saying, "Watch this." Like the story in the book, all sexual pleasure is through self-penetration. Freddy cuts himself between being beaten by his foster carer. Then, and it's supplied Freddy's impotent and perhaps uses this as some kind of sexual gratification, he never rapes the girls. He just cuts them and watches them die. Yes, Freddy changes from the first film as he becomes the star, and yes, he isn't scary anymore as we reach Nightmares 3, 4, 5 and 6. But Englund relishes the clown persona and takes a sadistic pleasure in killing the teens. In the Nightmare remake, in the post-Batman Begins world of being gritty and dark, Freddy's just malevolent with a huge chip on his shoulder. However, beyond that, all the 2010 film does is recreate the scenes, packs in the wet dream gag from Nightmare 4, and because Freddy's a child molester and not a child killer, he's just killing for revenge, and the menace he brings takes away from the playful pervert Englund brought. The remake doesn't work because it is just a rehash of early ideas, changes which weren't necessary, and despite Rooney Mara and Jackie Earle Haley doing their best, we've seen this before and it was much better. The same problem will circulate the now rumoured reboot of the reboot, and although I will always watch any new Elm Street material, I'm not excited because I fear the same problems. Surely a better idea will be to keep all the previous Nightmare films, not including the 2010 remake, in canon and relaunch in that way. Imagine it, Freddy vs Jason has happened, but that was years ago. Freddy's little more than a decomposed head and Jason is stalking Crystal Lake. Then, years later, a college kid does a presentation on someone called the Springwood Slasher and nightmares start again. But this time Freddy morphs into a new form. No one's seen him before this, so a new form can easily be played by a new actor and put down to nightmare regeneration. You don't have to remake the first film. You can keep it as canon and create a new film which adheres to the rules but doesn't retread them. Also, if Jason is walking around Crystal Lake, your next Friday film is also set up. Chuck in a few Easter eggs and hints, which is part of cinema now. Why not? The law's already been introduced. In Nightmare 1, Nancy takes away the fear and Freddy vanishes. In Freddy's Dead, all the kids have been killed. And in Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy is explained at being in hell because no one remembers or is scared of him. Like Doctor Who regeneration, when you have to change the actor, you have the excuse it's why it's the same character but with a different face. He's changing. He's fear himself. Fear changes. Look, I'm not here to hate on the 2010 version. Just learn from it. Even before I read the story of life and death of Freddy Krueger, Englund got it. He understood what it was to be unsettling and get off scaring the children he had omnipresent power over. Imagine not being able to sleep. It's the one thing we all have to do. Freddy's waiting no matter how much coffee you swallow, and that's his key. He's not in the house. He's in your head and just waiting for the lights to go off. The first Halloween film was all about the encroaching maniac, and Michael Myers did the same as Freddy. He watched, he closed in, and then killed. It was the only thing that brought him gratification. But where Myers was slow and blank, Freddy had personality and made lots of noise, be it laughing or just those crank-cool, deep-breathing tones. His voice was what gave the character depth. Yes, times have moved on and we aren't in the 1970s or 80s anymore, but with the right material, Freddy is someone who could unnerve a whole new generation before they went to bed. Sadly, the 2010 version had no chance of scaring anyone due to poor character, poor writing, and makeup which, quite frankly, looked like a baked potato. Freddy Krueger deserves one more chance at least. I wasn't really a fan of the recent Halloween film that came out because it didn't bring anything new to the table considering the people involved with it. It was nostalgia and repetition over Michael's psychology and suspense. Nightmare 2010 at least offered micronaps, but again and disappointingly, rather than have this as something scary that we could use and put you on edge, it was sacrificed for a few nice shots and a scene in the chemist which didn't really offer the same tension as when Nancy stayed awake for a week due to the unrelenting terror that waited for her behind her eyelids. Englund will always be a brilliant and possibly the best ever Freddy. But maybe the next actor can look at what worked, look at how he crafted the ultimate slasher villain, and bring some proper sleaze and impotent teasing back with the graphic deaths and make Freddy a truly Disgusting proposition again. But what do you think? And who could play Freddy now? What else could someone do that would accentuate the things which unsettles all of us when observing characteristics of a good villain? Leave a comment, and I'll catch you later.